The Pest and Predator podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm. Welcome to the Pest and Predator podcast, featuring interviews with entomologists from across the prairies. I'm your host, Sean Haney of realagriculture.com and Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147. And in this podcast, we're going to talk about some of the latest information on pests that you may encounter in your fields and the beneficial insects that help to control them. Today's guest on the Pest and Predator podcast is Dr. James Tansey. He's a provincial entomologist in Saskatchewan, and today we're going to talk all about grasshoppers. Jim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How's it going?
I'm doing great. So a lot of growers are really concerned about grasshoppers this year. What are the common species of grasshoppers that growers should be aware of? Because not every grasshopper is the same.
That's absolutely true. So, I mean, in Western Canada, we've got 85 species of grasshopper. Typically, only about 4 of these are going to be pests in Saskatchewan. These include the clear-wing grasshopper, migratory grasshopper, Packards, and two-stripe grasshopper. The thing that all of these have in common is they overwinter as eggs, and they tend to not be present as adults until mid-July, August. That said, we've got some early emergence or early development of clear-wing grasshoppers in some parts of the province currently.
And it seems like we're, like, with all the dryness, is that conducive to grasshoppers, or is it just kind of like an old wives' tale?
It's conditionally conducive. There are other environmental factors that are important, but typically the dry weather is going to stop them from, direct population reductions associated with drowning, bacterial and fungal infections of the eggs, and that sort of thing. So dry conditions, as a rule, contribute to population increase. There are some slight differences in different species as far as their preferences for moisture, but overall, that's a good general rule.
And what kind of which crops are they prone to attacking, and what kind of impact and damage to the crop will they cause?
Different grasshopper species have different preferences. So when we're talking migratory, Packards, and two-stripe, they're pretty broad generalists. So I mean, a lot is on the menu for those ones. When we're talking about clear-wing grasshopper, they tend to prefer grasses. So cereal crops are particularly vulnerable for those ones. Flax can occasionally suffer damage from these ones, but as a rule, if it falls outside of that grass group, it's not going to be terribly susceptible to clearwing unless populations are very, very high.
So as you look at the prairie provinces right now, what are we seeing in terms of populations, and how does that compare to the forecast maps that were out earlier?
Things so far are stacking up pretty consistently with what the forecast map showed. For those who aren't familiar, SCIC does a survey of about 11 to 1,200 sites or throughout the province of Saskatchewan every year, typically late in the summer. And what they found was that numbers were relatively low across the province. We had a couple of warm spots in the southwest and a little bit in the southeast, a little bit north of Swift Current, but nothing beyond the what would be considered to be light populations. We are seeing little hot spots. So I've gotten a recent report, as I mentioned before, of clear-wing grasshopper coming up in some numbers southeast of Weyburn. That's in rangeland, so the potential for them to move into nearby cereal crops certainly exists, and growers should keep an eye out for that. An important consideration with the survey, though, is that despite the large number of sites that are hit, we still suffer a bit from resolution because we're not hitting every site. Or every field, pardon me. So it's still really important for growers to be out there, and agronomists to be out there to actually look at what's happening with their populations, and also look at the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network site, because there is a degree day accumulation to let them know when the grasshoppers will be coming up, and some developmental information as well. So with that, typically mid-July, August, we'll start to see the late instar nymphs and the adults coming up. So the big ones. So that's when they're going to start causing serious damage. That said, we have a population of clearwing that's already reached adulthood in the southeast.
So Jim, how do I scout for them? Like, obviously, I can drive around and see what's left on the grill of the truck. But, how should I be scouting for them?
Yeah, the method that we recommend is to look at a 50-meter section. So that is, you can do it in the ditch next to the field or in the field. So you're going to want to stake that out, or mark it in some way. So you got 50 meters. Walk one long step, so that is a meter, and try to scare up everything you can. Count everything in your peripheral vision. You might want to have a little clicker counter with you, or a piece of paper, and repeat 50 times. Divide that by 50, and that'll be your square meter count.
Okay, what are some of the factors that contribute to grasshopper populations when we look at Western Canada?
Yeah, well, we did talk about temperature, certainly. I mean, they are ectotherms, so that's going to have influence all aspects of their development. So the time for them to reach adulthood, their propensity to catch diseases, the activity of their natural enemies. So temperature is very important. Moisture is very important. In midsummer, we can get those hot, sticky days, and that can contribute to infection with a fungus called Entomologist grillii. So there are different isotypes or different lines isotype is the wrong term. Different lines of Entomologist that affect different species of grasshopper differently. But what we saw last year in the area where we're seeing that localized outbreak of clearing grasshopper was that they were getting laid low by the Entomologist. So it's a fungus that causes them to climb to the top of a plant, and they grab on tight and they die there and rain fungal spores down on their brothers and sisters and cousins. So it had a relatively profound effect on this population. Not so much it wiped them out. They are obviously roaring back. Typically, it's not gonna have much more than about a 5% reduction in population, but it can be very very devastating. But it seemed those hot, sticky days seem to contribute to that infection at any rate.
What predators help to control the grasshopper?
They are a delicious, hoppy bag of food. There are a lot of things that love to eat them. We've got a number of vertebrates that love to eat them. The American kestrel is a little falcon that'll consume them. Burrowing owls are major local predators. Garter snakes will eat them. Prairie spadefoot toads, ground squirrels will eat them. A number of different songbirds as well. We've also got generalist arthropod predators as well. So things like robber flies, which are great big flies that actually hunt on the wing, and they'll actually snatch them out of the air. And they're comparable in size, maybe a little bit smaller than a grasshopper, and they'll take down a grasshopper that's larger than they are. We also have a little, it's actually a decent sized specid wasp, about the size of a yellow jacket. It's called the Great Golden Sand Digger. Isn't that a great name?
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's a parasitoid, solitary parasitoid. So what she is doing, she'll go out and dig individual little burrows, and she's going to grab grasshoppers, sting them, and stuff them down into these little holes, lay an egg on them, and let the larvae develop. Rinse, repeat, and then to contribute to the next generation. So once again, they're solitary. They're quite a gorgeous animal, actually. If anybody's curious to look them up. Carabid beetles can be tremendously important predators of grasshoppers as well. The predaceous ground beetles, they'll eat anything they can tackle, and they can tackle prey items that are larger than they are. Similar with wolf spiders, they'll take down anything they can tackle, and they can take down prey items that are larger than they are as well.
So you explained how these beneficials work. How can a farmer protect them so that there's more activity and they're doing more of that work for you for free?
Yeah, I think economic thresholds are the most important thing. Like, don't spray until you have to. You're protecting the natural enemies, and you're not spending money that you don't have to. So if your cost of control is greater than the benefit that you're going to get from applying the chemical, it doesn't make economic sense to apply the insecticide. In addition, just from a straight dollar to dollar comparison, not to mention what the potential effects it could have on natural enemies. So some of the products, there are a lot of products that are registered for grasshopper control in a lot of crops. Some of these have some mammalian toxicity and some vertebrate toxicity, and this needs to be taken into consideration. And some of them are more specific. They only affect specific groups of insects, and can be more selective. And so choices should be made based on that.
You mentioned that there are products out there to control grasshoppers. When do growers need to think about some of these control strategies?
Yeah, I think it's important for them to be monitoring populations midsummer, probably early July and on, depending on how much heat is accumulated, and I think early July isn't too early for that. Regular monitoring is important. It's good to keep an eye on the size of the actual grasshoppers in the population. If they get over, about a half inch, you might want to start consider controlling if they're at the economic threshold. And the economic threshold varies for different crops. So for most crops, we recommend 10 to 12 per square meter. But there are some crops that are particularly sensitive. So flax, when it's in boll, and lentil are both very sensitive to grasshopper feeding. So we recommend 2 per square meter in those cases, and those need to be considered by growers before they put a spray on.
Jim, you've mentioned a few species that will attack the grasshopper. Are there any more?
There are lots. There are important predators of grasshopper eggs, and so these include field crickets, which will happily munch on grasshopper eggs. Bee flies and blister beetles will also deposit their eggs in soil near grasshopper eggs. And bee flies, some species at any rate, will actually hover over where grasshoppers have laid their eggs and flick their abdomen, and they're actually flicking eggs down the hole. So these can be important predators of grasshopper eggs. There are some worms as well, some unsegmented worms that can be important for grasshoppers, particularly from the perspective of a grasshopper. One is called myrmis, and in this case, adult nematodes can be very large, 20 centimeters. So they're going to lay eggs on plants. The adult nematodes they're unsegmented worms, as I mentioned before. They'll actually move over the plants. They can lay eggs on the plant, and then the grasshoppers consume the microscopic eggs, and the nematodes hatch up inside the grasshopper and cause sterilization and eventual death. When death does occur, it's like an explosion of worms. So the worms come pouring out of this animal. Another one are horsehair worms, or nematomorphs. And an important genus of these is Gordius. And these, again, can be very large, up to 40 centimeters long. Adults are generally only in water. Larvae are free swimming. So if a grasshopper comes and feeds on, or takes a drink from some water, there's a chance it could take some of these larvae up that are free swimming in the water. These develop inside the grasshopper and also cause sterilization, much like the nematode, and eventual death. The real insidious bit about this one is that it actually causes the grasshopper to seek water when the horsehair worm has completed development. The grasshopper hits water, and the adult horsehair worm essentially explodes out of the grasshopper, oftentimes out of we'll say the lower digestive system of a grasshopper. So it's a little bit equivalent of a 30-foot worm exploding out of you if you went swimming. So it's hard to be a grasshopper.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. You entomologists, you guys have some pretty cool, gory stories when it comes to some of these parasitoids.
Oh, it's hard to be a bug. Yeah, it really is.
It's hard to be a bug. And we never even talked about how grasshoppers can make pretty good fish bait, too.
Oh, they absolutely can, yeah.
Yeah, just add fish to the list of species that like to chew on the grasshopper. Jim, thanks a lot for joining us here today on the Pest and Predator Podcast.
Oh, my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pest and Predator Podcast. It's brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm.